Hi, everyone. Welcome back to Misconceptions. We are going to have a powerful conversation today with a friend and colleague of mine. Welcome, Naomi Rosencrantz.
Thank you so much. I'm excited to be here and grateful.
I'm so happy you're here. Naomi, you and I met many years ago, actually. I don't even remember how many years ago at a PSI conference somewhere in Florida, I believe.
Yep.
And we just hit it off and just were like, we're going to become friends and we're going to become colleagues. And we became colleagues and then became friends. And I'm so grateful to have you not only in my life, but also as a person that I can refer to and consult with and have conversations with. You have a very broad perspective on life. And I'm always so grateful for that opportunity when I need it. So thank you for being there for me as well. And we're going to talk today. Naomi is trained like me. I'm going to ask you to introduce yourself a little bit professionally. But we are going to be having a conversation about grief and communication and really kind of like taking it a little narrow in not just how do we support people through grief, but how do we support people in navigating grief effectively when so much about the grief experience is surrounding communication and is where communication tends to fail. So we'll get to that in a minute, but Naomi, why don't you tell the audience a little bit about who you are?
Sure. Thank you so much, Dvora. It's been such a privilege, and I've gained so much knowing you, and I've learned so much, and I'm so grateful for us really having this relationship and for me being here. And I've had an interesting journey to get here. I started my career as actually a neuroscientist. I was getting my PhD in neuroscience, and about 4.5 years into the doctorate, I decided I didn't really want to do research anymore. So I left with my master's in neuroscience, and I taught high school for a while, and then eventually I went back for this graduate degree. And in marriage and family therapy. And I really specialize in reproductive mental health and traumatic grief and loss. And I just absolutely love it. I know it sounds weird, but whenever people say, "Oh, that's so hard,"
Mhm.
I always say, you know what, it's one of my biggest privileges of my life to be able to sit in these spaces with people and to be able to work with couples and individuals, kind of holding some of the hardest but yet most beautiful times in people's lives.
I think when you talk about that it is beautiful, right? I
Yeah.
know that. I understand that professionally and personally,
Yeah.
but maybe you could tell those that are listening to this conversation, why do we experience this as beautiful?
You know, because even in people's most dark, terrible times, I see, I mean, I think about one couple in particular who their baby died. Um, she suffered a stillbirth, and I always say that in the darkest time, you can see the most love sometimes.
Hmm.
And I always say that their love just fills the room. Even in the darkest, hardest times, people's just the way people are able to show up for each other and the resiliency that I've seen, even in just the most painful experiences, for me has been really beautiful, very painful, and also really beautiful. I guess it's the human connection.
Hmm.
It's the human
Hmm.
connection that I've oftentimes seen. Not all the time. I've seen a lot of
Yeah,
a
a
lot
lot
of
of bad
more
behaviors.
difficult
Yes.
dynamics and lack of connection, but that's why I say I guess it's beautiful.
Yeah. I think about it as also like it's the most raw space that somebody can be in at the deepest of grief. And so, that connection between the therapist and client or between client and couple, like when there's one and there's somebody else supporting them, you could see the magic of what it means to be connected and what it means to really actually get the support. Most of the people that you are working with are people that have lost babies, correct? Like perinatal loss or babies after birth, stillbirth, etc. When you're working with these couples, I want us to get started with where do you see the greatest challenge in how they communicate with each other? Where do we hit that bump? Like where's that first bump? I guess obviously everybody's individual. Everybody's an individual and has their own experiences, but there are some universal experiences. So why don't you share a little bit about where you see that like brick wall that people hit when it comes to communication and grief?
well, let me start with the couple, and then we can kind of talk about some other things that I've noticed. With the couple, what I've noticed the most is that there's miscommunication and misunderstanding about the way they grieve,
Hmm.
right? And I've not 100% of the time, right? There's obviously differences within grief, but oftentimes the mom or the person carrying the baby, I'm gonna call mom. I'm gonna honor all different types of families, and I'm just gonna use the word mom for the gestational carrier today. Um, the grief just oftentimes looks really different.
Hmm.
And it the moment a lot of times the woman sees the positive pregnancy test,
Hmm.
that is their baby. The
Yep.
attachment happens much earlier, whereas oftentimes the male partner, it's not that they're not grieving, but they maybe don't have the same attachment as early on. There's also the hormonal changes and differences that occur, and so the grief oftentimes looks different. In addition to the fact that oftentimes the male partner is kind of looked at as the supporter,
Yeah.
right? When um when someone asks when someone asks the father um about what's going on, they oftentimes say, how's your wife doing?
Right.
There's
Right.
not a whole lot of space around their own grief, and so they don't really have a space for their grief. So you asked me the question of where's the first roadblock. Is oftentimes women, the moms, grieve in a way that involves crying, involves emotionality, uh, involves kind of the the traditional, what
Yeah.
we see in movies, grieving. Whereas the male partner, oftentimes I say they do with grief,
Say that
right?
one more time. The
They do with grief.
uh-huh.
It's and so I'll give you an example. I had a couple in here not that long ago, and the the mom said to her husband, and to me, she's like, "You're not even grieving. All you're doing
Mm.
is like redoing the kitchen. You don't
Mm.
even care." And I said, that's his way of grieving. He's doing with his grief. And so,
Mm.
one of the first things that I often give a lot of education about is the different ways that a couple grieves. And that is one of the first roadblocks. It's not whether or not you grieve the same or at the same time. It's really how you could just support each other in your grief.
So what I hear you describing also is that like when the grief actually physically looks different, it doesn't mean that one way is better or the right way to grieve, right? So
Mhm.
I like that idea of they do grief or they do with grief, which is different than they deal with grief, right? They're
Yeah.
doers, and we recognize that we're focusing on stereotypes, but it is a value. It's a stereotype because there's a long, documented history of this. This is not a new concept. This idea that men and women will grieve differently, and I think about also like how you described like the women's grief, a woman's grief very often is it's external. Like there others can see it happening, and
Hmm.
when we're talking about the grief of the partner or the grief of the husband, it can be really isolated. It could be alone. It could be internalized. It could be
Yeah.
something that people are going to miss completely. And so you can imagine that the overt and external griever standing next to the internal isolated griever, the two of them don't understand that each of them are experiencing similar emotional experiences, but in very, very
Yeah,
different ways. Yeah,
absolutely. Absolutely. There's also, you and I have actually discussed this before.
sure.
Um, there's also a powerlessness
Hmm.
that men oftentimes feel in perinatal loss and infant loss because they oftentimes carry so much guilt because they couldn't save their baby, they couldn't help their wives, and that is their job. Their job is to protect.
Hmm.
And so a lot of times the actionable items will make them feel a little bit more powerful. They'll make them feel they have some kind of control. They could take action in supporting and helping and maybe doing things that are helpful for the family and household because they couldn't do the one thing that they deeply really wish that they could, which was help in those moments or save.
Yeah. I always find it so fascinating because it's not logical, meaning they could not have protected that baby. There was nothing they could
Mhm.
have done to save the baby from dying in utero, right? There's nothing they could have done to protect that child. And yet that paternal feeling of responsibility and feeling of like, it's my job to do this, right? Then that kicks in louder than the reality of, no,
Yeah.
there really was nothing you could have done. And that really can direct the way they experience the grief and loss. Like it's something that
Yeah.
is so big and so overpowering that being told otherwise is irrelevant.
Right.
Um,
It's funny because
yeah.
you use the word logic.
Mm-hmm.
It's not
Mm-hmm.
logical. And one of the things that we know about grief is that it's deeply emotional. It's carried in the emotion centers of your brain. And so there's so many feelings that are surprising and non-logical,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
that that's part of the reason why grief can be so overwhelming,
Hmm.
right? Because it's not that logical part of your brain.
So, as a neuroscientist or an almost PhD neuroscientist, I don't know, Naomi, the mother in me is going, just finish the darn degree and just finish it. What do you
I
mean you
know.
stopped at 4.5 years in? Are you kidding me? My goodness, I'm going to need therapy on that, right? I could not handle that as a mom, but I'm just saying. But if when we're talking about that non-logical part of the brain, it's rooted in emotion. What are some of the other experiences that you notice in couples or in individuals who are grieving that continue to keep them in that space of emotion versus logic, or what else is happening in that space of the brain um, that maybe somebody else would be like, this doesn't make any sense, and yet this is how it feels.
Interesting. So what you're asking me is like what else is going on in terms of the brain that is making it feel like disconnected in the couple or okay.
Or just about
Okay.
the own internal experience. Like if we know it sits in emotion and not logic, then we can understand why somebody
Mhm.
might say, I feel like I failed my child because of
Oh
this.
yeah.
Right?
Yeah. So there's so many feelings of guilt and shame and I should have protected. And those aren't the logic part of the brain,
Right.
right? The other thing that we know is that in very high activation and in really deep grief, your limbic system, your emotion brain is so fired up, and actually your thinking brain oftentimes is so dimmed that they're really not talking to each other, right? And so from a neuroscience perspective, that is also why like there's just a lot of this experience isn't logical because in times of high activation, like fight or flight, we know that our prefrontal cortex, our thinking brain, is really not talking so well to our limbic system, our emotion brain, right? And for survival, our brain needed to be able to do that, right? So if a lion jumps out of the bushes, we can't really think, wait a second, should we run? Should we fight? How scary does the lion look? Right?
Right.
We'd be dead. Right away, our body picks some protective mechanism and usually runs away or freezes or whatever it is. Um, but in times of things like deep grief, our body really doesn't know the difference between a lion jumping out of the bushes and our activation from the loss of our child,
Hmm. Hmm.
right? Our body doesn't know the difference. So um thought the very illogical thoughts like, when they are illogical, like um I should have done something different. I should have saved my wife. It's because I lifted that item.
Right.
All of those
Right.
things that aren't logical, are the reason why there's like a huge uptick in them.
Hmm.
Our logic brain just really isn't able, our thinking brain isn't as functional.
I think that also is going to play out in the relationship, right? So if she is the our identified client, patient, whatever, or just the person who just had a baby who died, right? It's her body that lost the pregnancy. That I can imagine that the body is so, and I know that the body is so activated that the thinking brain of
Yeah.
like, my husband's not out to fight for me. He's
Mhm.
not out to fight me. He's not out to ignore me. He's just doesn't know how to
Mhm.
handle me. Creates a disc, the frontal cortex, that frontal lobe is so shut down that that thinking brain that says, no, no, he's your friend, he
Mhm.
wants to help you, is shut off, and all you
Right.
feel is frightened, alone, disconnected, right? How are
Yeah.
you seeing that showing up in the couples that you're working with?
Um, a lot of reactivity towards a lot of times towards the male partner.
Yeah.
Right, where oftentimes I see him being really afraid to say something wrong.
Hmm.
I see a lot in like just that disconnection, that misunderstanding, that reading, like not being on the same page,
Hmm. Hmm.
right? Like he'll say something and she'll just like jump and she'll react because her grief is so big and her nervous system's so activated that her logic brain can't say in that moment, my husband loves me.
Hmm.
He
Hmm.
didn't mean that. Grief is making my brain almost like a more sensitive
Hmm.
to most input, right? There's a huge sensitivity, but
Hmm.
particularly from the male partner.
Sure.
Um, so oftentimes what I will um, tell couples, right, is number one, a gentle reminder that number one, you're both grieving, that this is really hard, um, that you're going to grieve in a different way, that you're going to grieve differently. Um, but before reacting, um, trying to just stop, take a really deep breath, reflect on like, what am I really feeling right now? I'm feeling like misunderstood. I'm feeling really lonely. I'm feeling like you're not grieving in the same way, and that we're not together in this.
Hmm.
Um, and then to state a need, really trying to identify first, which is sometimes really hard for us to do in grief.
Sure, sure.
Identify the need and clearly communicate it in a way that's non-blaming.
So let's do an example of what that would sound like when you're working with a
Sure.
couple. Give me an
Okay.
example.
Okay. So I would say he says something like, oh, like, oh, you're still sad right now, or gosh, this is a lot for me.
Right.
Right? I would just say stop before reacting, before defending. Say something like, you know what, I'm feeling really overwhelmed right now. Can we just take one moment? Can we take one moment to breathe? I just need to breathe because I don't want to say something mean,
Right. Right.
right? And then ask yourself what you're feeling underneath. Like, I think I snapped because I feel really helpless right now,
Hmm. Hmm.
right? I think I reacted in that way because I'm feeling really disconnected. And then state your need calmly. I just need to know you're here with me, even if you're not able to talk about it with me right now. Um, Even if it feels overwhelming to you, can we do something like just sit together and hold hands? Can we even sit together and look at one picture and then we can do something else? Um, just kind of clearly stating the reconnection need, which
Hmm.
is oftentimes what couples struggle with.
Yeah, I mean, I think that that's at the core, right? That core of disconnection versus connection. And I think sometimes each of them are trying to figure out how to connect but don't really know how to do it, right? Like it was interesting having a conversation with somebody today where within the couple the husband keeps saying, "But I want to be intimate with you. Like I want to have sex. Like we're not having sex." And she's going, "We're not spending any time together. Why would we have time to have sex?" Like it actually is like he keeps saying he keeps making bids for connection and she keeps saying, "This feels lonely." Even
Mhm.
though the intention is connection, for her, that pathway to connection is not actually going to be physical. The pathway to
Yeah,
connection is, can we spend time together? Can you check in on how I'm feeling? Can we take a walk? Can we talk about anything other than the baby? Like, can we just be a couple? And then we could figure out how we would, that will hopefully eventually, because it's a priority for both of them, how that would lead to a sexual experience, right? Which is of
right,
high priority for him and not as high priority for her. Um,
right.
but when we're talking about that bid for connection, you
Mhm.
know, I think when I hear you describe that like pause, I think of it as like such an ideal, right? It's like I wish I spoke to my husband that way. Like I wish I experienced like that. Like let me pause a minute and tell you where I am in my feelings. But I think that logically most people are like going to snap back, right? There's going to
Mhm.
be that snap. I'm
Yes, sure.
wondering, right? And I'm thinking
Mhm.
about like from a prevention model, or if I'm working with somebody who is a couple who is struggling through grief, what are some of the key components of communication preemptively, preventatively, that I can kind of like taking responsibility from the get-go about communications might be challenging, or there might be some disconnection, or there might be a lot of overwhelm here. Like, let me give you some key points as to how to strengthen communication in the couple when you may feel disconnected. Is there like a guide path that you offer?
So I would say a few different things, right? Number one, I would say um choose a good moment to
Right.
start. So there's a few things. Okay. So make sure that you're choosing the right time. Maybe not before bedtime or in a crisis or um, in the middle of a really stressful moment. Some couples find it really helpful to have like a what Gottman actually calls a ritual of connection, as we're talking about bids of connection, because that was
Mm-hmm.
definitely Gottman stuff. Um, Having a ritual connection where you have a set time every single night where you just kind of talk, even if it's just 15 minutes, it sometimes is enough to allow to decrease the buildup,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
to diminish the buildup where it becomes this like reactivity,
Mm-hmm.
right?
And we're talking about that from when there's already challenges within the couple, but we can
No,
also, it can, or
yeah.
prior to when there is no
I
challenge.
think as whether or not you're in grief and whether or not you're struggling, but particularly if you're struggling and in grief, these
Mm-hmm.
are actually really important interventions and really important things to do, even within couples that really aren't struggling and things are
Mm-hmm.
going well. It's always good to practice these things generally, but it becomes even more important when
Mm-hmm.
there's a lot of activation and a lot of difficulties.
I think about it also like in an ideal world, if we consistently had those rituals, then
Mhm.
when there is an interrupter, right? When there's a something that happens, we have a much greater chance of being able to fall back on that ritual to maintain structure and
To
stability
maintain
within the
structure.
relationship. Yeah.
That's right.
Mhm.
And the other piece is figure out ways to connect. When you talked about that other couple, like
Mhm.
he wants to have sex, she
Mhm.
wants intimacy,
Mhm.
right? Intimacy is a big pie that sex is a piece of it,
Correct.
right? And so really mindfully, particularly in grief, really mindfully trying to figure out how to maintain connection that maybe isn't grief focused. You
Mhm.
know, what are some things that you two enjoy together? I see couples that love to go for walks every night. Um, I see couples who, play board games, who cook together. Um, what are ways that you maintain a connection so
Mhm.
that you could help each other hold the grief?
Mhm. Yeah.
Right? Some of the other things is, practicing, making sure when you communicate difficult things, to use, and you've heard this before, right? The I feel statements. I feel sad. I feel disconnected. I feel helpless. When this happened, I need. I actually oftentimes give couples this I feel
Mm-hmm.
blank. When this happened, like your reporter,
Mm-hmm.
not when you did, and stating the need. So, kind of that structured intervention sometimes is helpful for more difficult things.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Um,
You know,
assuming that oh, go ahead. Yeah,
no, I'm
please.
just thinking like I'm thinking also like these are really important and critical components of when we're working in through grief because I think there's a lot of feelings and I heard this once from a therapist who said she feels like after 2 weeks the male grief kind of like drops away and it's not
Yeah.
as intense as the female grief. And so from her perspective, she was saying like we have to be clear that it is going to shift and change with time. That the way that you're grieving the first 2 weeks may be beautiful and together and connected, and then all of a sudden after 2 weeks it
Mm,
kind of falls away.
yeah.
But there is a necessity to potentially talk about the loss, to talk about the baby, to talk about the grief itself.
Yeah.
And there's also responsibility to talk about other things. Talk about your day and your relationships and
Yeah.
your family systems and whatever it is, maybe other
Mhm.
children. But it's critical for us to also create time to talk about
To,
grief itself.
right.
Yeah, the two
Right.
spaces.
The
Yeah.
two spaces. And so it's considering ways how you could remember together,
Hmm.
right? Whether it's, a chesed, a charity project that you could do together, or planting a tree, or together writing letters to your baby, or or making a donation in memory of your baby. Really talking with each other. How do we want to remember together? And
Hmm.
how do we want to grieve together?
Right.
And then making space for the other piece where we know that oftentimes mom and dad grieve differently. And at some point, one may feel a little bit more overwhelmed than the other, and always talking about it. And so being open with emotional capacity, saying something like, I could do 10 minutes today talking about the baby. And that's all I have the emotional capacity to. That doesn't mean I'm not here for you. That doesn't mean I don't love you. It just means this
Exactly.
is my capacity, and making sure that there's structures of support. If your partner is not able to be there in the way you need all the time, support groups, friends who've experienced perinatal or infant loss or similar losses.
Hmm.
Um, things like that. Make sure that there's structures of support.
Right. I think that's one of the things that women very often get kind of look waylaid on is that they've put a lot of they've invested a lot into their marriages, especially longer term marriages. They've probably invested a lot of time, maybe a lot of emotional energy, which we should. And also sometimes it's to the exclusion of others. And so there isn't another there's no other lineup of people that are there to support you in the long term in terms of like good friendships or good relationships.
Hmm.
Um or there's a feeling of I like my husband is my everything and he should be the one who's fully able to support me 100% as we go through this pregnancy loss together. And I think that like you just said like there are going to be partners who are going to be able to say like this is my capacity, I don't have more to give tonight.
Mm,
And I do feel like it's important for us to respect that versus like my husband has failed me, he's not supportive, he's not connect. Well, what does that actually mean? And what are we expecting of the spouse? And is it reasonable? And yes, expecting your spouse to be supportive is reasonable. The question is, how much is the need and how much needs to be filled by that partner and how much maybe needs to be filled by somebody else
yep.
rather than putting all the responsibility on the partner. Are you
And the
experiencing
partner.
that as well?
Yes. So I've seen it. I oftentimes, for grief, couples counseling. I oftentimes, and that's a little bit different than traditional couples counseling. It's
Mm-hmm.
a little bit of a shift where um, when I see a couple, um, the partner doesn't always come in,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because sometimes the mom needs a little bit more space and time to have to process their loss in a different way,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
maybe they need to talk about it more. And a lot of times the husband doesn't have paternity leave now. He actually
Hmm.
has to go back to work. And so he also has a lot of other stuff going on and a
Yeah.
lot of distractions,
Yeah.
right?
Absolutely.
And so what we oftentimes see is the couple doesn't always stay coming in. A lot of times the partner comes in and out, and the mom kind of needs a little bit more space
Hmm.
to really process both the emotional and also the physical trauma of their body and everything that they went through.
Yeah, I think that we have to be respectful of the different ways that people grieve and also the different way that people experience the grief. And rather than seeing it as like, my husband can't show up for me, my husband has been unavailable, my husband, versus being like, he has able to come to the table, he's been able to show up for you in a limited way, or his ability to show up for you more than what you're asking for right now, it may not be available to them.
Right.
Yeah.
And the other thing that I also see a lot is please, we want our partners to be mind readers. We really do.
Right.
How does he know that he shouldn't be doing that? Or how does he not know that he should be doing that? I'm one of the biggest things that I really see is a lack of communication and a lack of ability to identify what you actually do need
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
he doesn't know. So it's sometimes a capacity thing, but it's oftentimes like he should know what I need.
Yeah.
And then I'll inquire, well, what do you need?
Yeah.
And there'll be a pause, and then they'll be like, I'm not sure actually.
Or they'll say, I just need him
Right?
to support me. I'm like,
Right.
what
Well,
does
what
that
does that look
mean? What,
like? And what
right.
does that,
And how
right?
did you communicate that to him? Did you tell him that
Mhm.
that's what you need? Or are
Yeah.
you just inferring it? Or are you just assuming that he knows? Right.
Right.
I,
I
I
mean,
think this is like a critical piece of relationships is
yeah.
knowing my own needs. Maybe it's sometimes getting my own needs met elsewhere, but, and I'm talking about within an appropriate realm, but
Right.
like getting my maybe psychological needs or maybe some of my emotional needs met elsewhere. And then there are other needs that will be met beautifully by a spouse or partner, right?
Yeah.
That it is something that there are things that can be fed into that healthy relationship. And there might be things that, no, those needs can be met by a friend, by a support group, like you said, by a therapist, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Where are some of the other things that you feel people get caught up in? Like, what are some of the other areas where, when working with couples, especially when it comes to communication around grief, where do you think people get stuck? Is there anything else that we haven't spoken about?
Well, I think faith is a big one.
Hmm. Tell me more.
Um, So I think that some people respond to loss and the loss of their child in very different ways. And for some people in the couple, it they they feel more of like a connection to God or Hashem or whatever it is that they believe, right? They almost like go towards the priest or the rabbi and like
Mm-hmm.
really want to connect with their faith.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas I see other people in the couple who are so angry. They're so angry at God. They're resentful and they start to question. And sometimes it could be a source of stress. Like, how can
Mm-hmm.
you say that? How can you believe that? And one of the things that we talk about is, you've even said this, like, God could handle it. It's okay. We all have to have our own relationships with faith, and we have to honor the other person in the couple's feelings around faith at this time. So that's another thing that I kind of see causes a
That's a
little bit
big
of
one.
tension. It is a
Yeah,
big one.
I think it's more than a little. I could see this becoming a really significant source of tension.
Hmm.
Where I've seen it is where one couple actually says, "I don't even know if I believe in God anymore,"
Hmm.
and the other partner is like, "But we are religious people. Like we are committed,
Yeah.
religiously living, committed life people. Like what are you talking about?" Or like you said, how can I say such a thing? Um, and I think our job as therapists is not to fix that disconnection or to kind of help them in any way reorient to their faith. I was actually at a conference recently and somebody said, a woman in the audience said, it was not a presenter, a woman in the audience said that she had a client who said, um, let me see, think the words were properly. She said, I don't know that I don't think that I can, that I believe right now, or I don't think feel
Mhm.
like I have any faith, or I don't feel like I have much belief in God right now. Or I forget if it was actually belief in God or prayer. Like she said, I cannot pray.
Yeah.
And the
Hmm.
therapist said, well, what if I can believe on your behalf and I can pray on your behalf? And I had a very strong reaction to it,
Mm-mm.
right?
Yeah,
I was very good. I
me
did not
too.
correct her openly in the audience, but that's not an appropriate response, in my opinion.
Mm-mm.
And I think that what you're describing is, there we have to allow for these disconnections, and ultimately they may or may not find their way back to faith.
Right.
But my job as a therapist is not to lead them there,
Mm-mm. It's
right?
not to fix it. And sometimes I'll say, like, how would it feel to you to talk to a rabbi about this?
Mm-hmm.
How
Mm-hmm.
would it feel for you to talk to a priest about some of these feelings and making sure that it's a clergy who can support them in their grief,
Mm-hmm.
and who understands grief
Mm-hmm.
and
Right.
can be really compassionate towards those struggles.
Absolutely.
Um, that's fairly paramount in
Yes.
kind of those conversations.
Yes, and we've all met people, we've all met the clergy who don't quite get it and
Yeah.
unfortunately cause more harm than healing.
Mhm.
I think also that idea of being able to say, instead of taking that and running with it when someone says, I'm really struggling with my faith, or I don't know that I
Mhm.
want to pray anymore, to be able to say to them, what is that like for you to
Yeah.
feel? Right.
Yeah,
And what is it like
absolutely.
for you? Because they may say, you know what? It feels great. It feels freeing. It feels, this is what I need right now. And so therefore I wouldn't run to offer them anything more in terms of resource. But
Yeah.
if they say it's causing me so much distress, I remember a woman said to me, she's like, I'm having such a difficult time connecting to God, and it is causing me so much sadness and so much pain. And like, she
Mm.
said to me, I miss my relationship with God.
So that's what
So,
I hear most often.
mm-hmm,
I actually, when faith is brought up, it's often in the context of deep distress.
mm-hmm,
I believed in God before. I used to go to shul. I used to pray. I used to do all of these things, and I can't bring myself to walk into a synagogue.
mm-hmm,
I can't
mm-hmm,
do it. It makes me overwhelmed and it makes me just distressed. And so for me, most of the conversations around faith are these, like, one of those ripples of pain. It's like the
mm-hmm,
pain of the loss and the pain of the disconnection with my husband and the
yeah,
pain of my lost relationships with family and friends and the pain of not being able to go to a bris and the pain of not being able to walk into synagogue and the
right.
pain of my disconnection with God.
Yeah.
And like for me, that's it. From what I've observed when it has come up, it's just one of those ripples of losses that feel like you're on a boat, like in this big wave and like a big storm, and you used to have something to hold on to, and you no longer have that.
Yeah.
Because faith is something that can be very grounding for people, and when it's ripped up like that, it can be incredibly,
Mm-hmm.
incredibly overwhelming.
Yeah, and I have seen people who, most people I have worked with have walked their way back into their faith, but it might look different than it did before.
Hmm.
And for some, it continues to be a deep source of disconnection. And I
Hmm.
think that as a therapist, we just honor that. We respect it. We don't try to fix it, even if you
No,
identify as a faithful therapist or a faith-based therapist, right? Not my place. It's just not my
nope,
place. So,
absolutely not.
what are some of the, let's talk about some misconceptions. What are some misconceptions about communication that, have you thought of any that you want to make sure that we kind of like dispel? What are some misconceptions about grief and communication?
Hmm. I mean, that it's always going to be a struggle.
Hmm. Hmm. Okay.
That someone, there's that statistic that unfortunately therapists have like punted out just really non-mindfully that there's a big divorce rate for people who have lost children,
Yes.
right? A higher divorce rate. And I've seen it,
Mm.
right? I've seen it. That tends to stick. I never say it. I would never say that in a therapy session. But for whatever reason, either Dr. Google says it or a different therapist says it. And so the misconception that this is going to be hard and this is going to devastate our relationship.
Hmm. Hmm. Hmm.
Um, that's one of the bigger ones I see. And from what I've seen, if there's just a lot of compassion and curiosity, and love and understanding and patience, this could actually, and I've seen it, and that's where I said at the beginning where it
It's
can be
beautiful.
beautiful.
Yeah. Hmm.
I've seen it just connect couples in such a deeper, um, connected way, even though it's painful.
Mm.
So
Hmm.
that's one of the bigger ones that one of the bigger misconceptions that I've seen.
Yeah. It makes a lot of sense, actually. I think that's probably one of the most important ones, that it doesn't have to break you, and that it won't break you. But, but the relationships often will need attention.
Yeah.
Um, and it's not just like riding it out and see where it goes. It does need much more intentional, I think, connection and communication, like we were talking about,
Mhm.
creating time, creating space, creating understanding about what am I feeling, what are you feeling, and how do we find each other in the darkness.
Yeah.
Really, truly.
Yeah.
Naomi, thank you for this conversation. This was great. I really
Yeah.
appreciated our time together. Thank you for being the person who says yes and willing to share these more complicated conversations with me. Thank you so
No, of
much.
course. Thank you.